Previously I showed you how to install the StyleGAN2-ADA repo into Paperspace. In this video I'm going to show you how to actually run a training session. So I'm already here in Paperspace. I've already started my machine. One thing I want to note is if you're using Paperspace, make sure you set your frequency to either off, which is this first setting, or 1 week. Training does take a little bit of time, usually about a little over a day with the new repository, I would say. So definitely make sure you turn this off or set it to 1 week. If you set it for last time, it'll auto shut off and then it'll be kind of stuck. So you have to do that before you start your machine. So I've already done this. My machine is on, ready to go, and I'm set up here to start training. So first thing we're going to do is I'm just going to log into using the desktop mode. Again, there's lots of ways you could use the Paperspace terminal. You could use SSH. You could use a bunch of things. I'm just going to assume that for a lot of folks, you might be using this because you're not like the strongest in terminals. So we'll just use the desktop. Yeah, so we'll click on this and get started. One thing to note about using the desktop mode is for me at least, the cut and paste never really works the way I want it to, which is fine. It just takes a little bit longer to sort of like type out your commands and everything. So just be aware of that. So as you recall, if we go to our files here, you'll see inside of our files we already have StyleGAN2-ADA. That's the install. If you haven't done that already, I recommend going back and watching that video to make sure you're set up. So the first thing we need to do is we need to get our image data set into our machine here. So I'm going to assume that you've already gone ahead and processed all of your images. Unlike something like Runway, you need to pre-process everything to be exactly the same dimensions of squares. In this video, I'll be doing a square 1024 by 1024 model. If you've got a 512 by 512 or a 256 square, like those will work fine as well. So what I've gone ahead and I've already done is I've uploaded a zipped folder of all of my images to my Google Drive. And this works fairly well with Paperspace because you can log in using the Firefox plugin here. You can or the Firefox app. You can log in and already download your file directly from your Drive account. So I'm just going to go ahead and head over to my Drive account. And I'm just going to sign in here. And it looks like I'll have to do a two-factor. Always good to do some correct OPSEC here. Okay, so 1. Cool. All right, so I'm already logged in. So I've already saved all of my files to a folder called Datasets. And it is this one here at the bottom. So we're going to do download. And download anyway. So this will take a little bit of time. I might stop the video and just make sure that this downloads correctly. See how long this is going to take. So probably pretty quick. Yeah, actually this is going to be pretty quick. And the reason it's pretty quick is because we're on Drive, which is already a very, very fast server. And then Paperspace is already also a very, very fast server in the cloud. So this downloads very, very quickly. That would probably take a couple minutes if I weren't on these two really fast servers. So we're going to go ahead and just double click and open this. And I'm going to extract this and I'm going to choose where to put it, which will be in my home folder and then in StyleGAN2-ADA. And I'm just going to make a new folder in here. This is generally what I do. I just create a new folder called raw datasets. And we're going to hit create. And we're going to extract that to there. And I can now go ahead and shut everything. Close tabs. And we'll come back over here and we'll double click into StyleGAN2-ADA. So now inside of raw datasets, you'll see I have a folder of images, right? So a bunch of geologic minerals and things. So what we need to do now is for StyleGAN to work, we need to convert these from JPEG images into a raw format that is easier for the model to read. So what we're going to do is we're going to open up our terminal. and we're going to first off move into that folder, so StyleGAN2-ADA, and we're going to do Python dataset. So the dataset underscore tool is going to allow us to create a folder of images. And the first argument you pass in is where that folder is going to reside. So basically, where do you want to put all of your TF records files? So we're going to do /datasets. And actually, I might need to create this folder here. So let's go ahead and do this first. So let's say a new folder, datasets. So now we have a folder of raw datasets, which are raw images, and then datasets. So come back over here, datasets, and then let's give this a name. So let's call it Weinrich. I usually use a name that is like based on what the dataset is or like where I found it. Realize I have a typo here, so let's do datasets. Okay, and now the second argument, so we're gonna hit space. The second argument is the path to the actual like dataset. So in this case, it's /raw underscore datasets /WEINRICH. So we should be able to just run this command now. And what it's going to do, it might take a couple minutes actually, depending on how many images are there, depending on the size of the images, other things. This is essentially going to convert our images into a raw TF records format that is then easily readable. So let's go ahead and hit enter. Interesting. Okay, so anytime you find that these sort of like errors where it says no module named, this usually means you need to install some sort of like dependency. So in this case, what I'm going to do is I'm going to type in pip install tqdm. Now this is sort of where it differs from something like Colab. Like Colab comes pre-installed with a bunch of these dependencies already set up. In this case, Paperspace usually contains most of the things you need, but in this case, we're just missing one. So we'll just go ahead and install this. And I think we need to do --user. This makes sure that we're installing it to the user account. Yep, that worked. Cool. So now we can go ahead and rerun this command. So I'm going to press up a couple times until I get back to this, and then we'll run this, and this should work. Oh, you know what? Okay, here's what I did wrong. So you do actually need to put in a different command. You need to put in before you pass in all of these paths, you need to use create underscore from underscore images space. The reason for this is there are a bunch of default settings here that you can use, and these will allow you to download pre-built data sets. So in this case, there's like a create sci-far 100, and we're going to use the create from images, which is basically just a way of saying we've got a bunch of raw images and we just want to convert the data set from this. So we'll go ahead and hit enter. Cross our fingers and hope that this is everything we need for this one. Yep, so this is working now. So see, there's 3,772 images in my data set, and it's going to load through these. It's going to take a little bit of time. So what I'll probably do is I'll just pause the video, and I'll come back when this is finished. All right, so this is finished up. It took about 5 to 10 minutes. So again, it sort of depends just on how big your data set is and the size of those images. But you'll see it finished, and it just said added 3,772 images. So this is all set up now. So the other thing to note is this: you only need to run this the very first time that you create a new data set. So if we were to come back and try to retrain this or resume, like, we don't need to run this again. This only needs to happen to create the TF records files. So once you have the TF records files, you're fine. You're ready to go. So we can go ahead and we can look at these files here really quickly. So we double click into data sets, and then we'll click into here. You'll see there are a number of files here. Different repos do different things. The base StyleGAN default repo produces these 10 records, which are pretty large. I bet if I click on this and go properties, so this is a 12 gigabyte file. So it's very, very large. This is again why you need a pretty decent size hard drive space in order to do this training. So just be aware that if you have 10,000 images, this might be 25 gigabytes or larger. So you really want to think about, if you have a big data set, you have a bigger hard drive space as well on Paperspace. So we've got our data set here. So let's go ahead and get started training. So the train command is Python train.py. And what I recommend doing is just doing --help, and this is going to show you all of the options you have available to you. So you'll see here that the first thing is, if you scroll to the top of this section, there's a couple things that are pretty much required. So first off, we need to set a out directory. You'll see as required. We need to set a number of GPUs. The default is to 1, which will be fine for us. We're going to set the snap, which I'll talk about in just a minute. The snap is essentially how often do you get a snapshot, which is a model file and a fake image setup. And then we're going to need to define a path for the dataset. And then we've got some other things here about mirroring and mirror Y. So mirror is, are we okay with flipping the dataset left to right? Mirror Y is, are we okay with flipping the dataset top to bottom? So in my dataset, I'll be doing the flipping left and right, but I won't be doing top to bottom because there's some shadows and things I don't want to influence my dataset. We'll look at metrics. I will actually turn off metrics for this, just because it takes a little bit longer. It adds some additional time. You're welcome to play with this. The default is FID 50K full. So if you don't put in anything, if you don't say metrics equals none, you will actually just get some metrics, which would be fine. Actually, I might do it for this data set. I think we can just turn them on and leave it. That seems fine. We need to set the config. So I'll talk a little bit about this. These are a bunch of configurations around, what type of data set am I working with, those sort of things. I have set some default, like one of the things in my repo is I've set some default just purely based on the size of your GPU. So this assumes you're using a 1024 by 1024 data set. So we'll look at that. And then we will probably not touch. Okay, let's see what happens there. Might have lost my internet connection a little bit. All right, my connection is back. Sorry about that. So let's pick it up from where we were. We won't touch gamma in this example. Gamma, if you were to change this value, is supposed to help with more complex data sets. I probably would recommend just training it without gamma, or just using the default to start with and then see where it goes from there. K-image, we'll just use the default. This is how long we want to train it for. You could set your own values here. It doesn't really matter. Augmentations, we're going to use the default augmentation mode. I'll probably talk about this in a different video if you want to really play with it. We'll also keep the default probability as well as the target and the aug pipe. Again, I'll probably talk about this in a different video, but there's different types of augmentation. So if you do run into issues, you might want to change the augmentation type. Let's see what else is here. So I think this is good enough for us to start with. And then there's a resume. So we'll talk a little bit about resume and how we can use transfer learning for this. There are some, what's nice here is there are also some examples here. So let's say you want to transfer learn from the Met Faces dataset using you want to transfer learn Met Faces from FFHQ. So this is sort of the example that we might start with, is we might start by using just this example and then sort of building from there. So we can actually, I believe inside of Paperspace itself, I can copy and paste paths. So let's go ahead and build up from this. So let's go ahead and paste this. And this is going to cause issues, isn't it? Yeah, all right, that's going to cause issues. So let's hit that and let's hit Control-C. Okay, so we've got our path here. So let's start by changing the out directory. So I'm going to go over here. And I'm going to actually hit /. So instead of going to the home folder and adding runs there, I'm going to do this directly inside of my StyleGAN2-ADA repo. I only have one GPU to use, so I'm going to set this to 1. And then I've got my data sets folder. So my path again is /, because it's inside of the folder I'm currently in. And it is a different name. It is called Weinrich. And the configuration I want to use is actually going to be 11 gigabyte -GPU. So these configurations that I have built up are built totally around the size of your GPU, and they assume that you have a 1024 by 1024 data set you're going to use. In this case, 11 gigabytes and 16 gigabytes, which is the P5000, the server I'm using, they're the same configuration because you can't actually change any of the configs to fit more batch sizes into the 11 gigabyte GPU. or sorry, the 16 gigabyte GPU. So we're just going to use the 11 gigabyte for this. If you do have a P6000, or if you rented the P6000, which I believe is like $1 an hour or something, you can use, there's a config for 24 gigabyte GPU. And that gives you a little bit more space, a little bit faster learning, that sort of thing. But sort of up to you what you want to use. The 11 gigabyte dash GPU is totally fine as a config. Lastly, I'm probably going to change our snaps here. So the snap is basically, I think on a P5000, you're going to get a new snap, or a new tick, essentially, probably every 30 minutes. In this case, what I really want to do is actually really only want to get it for so basically, if this would be, let's see, if I get it every 30 minutes, and this is a 10 snaps, or 10 ticks per snap, that's going to mean there's about 5 hours between every fake I get, which is kind of high, or like probably not ideal. So let's make this a little bit smaller. Let's do 4. So this means every 2 hours I see a new fake built, and I get a new data set model. Some people might even set this to 1 if you just like want to really see it train really fast. Sort of a balance here of like how many files do I need to be producing, and again, how much hard drive space do I have, versus, you know, how quickly do I want to see it change. I'm going to set it to 4. This will be fine for me. You're welcome to set it to 1. You're welcome to set it to 8, whatever you want to do. Just know that you sort of have this balance of like, might not see results or might not see fakes very quickly versus like less hard drive space is filled up. One thing to also note is that let's say for whatever reason Paperspace doesn't really go down, but let's say Paperspace were to go down, or maybe like something happens and you actually hit stop on your machine. If you have not produced a new snapshot with a new pickle file, you can't resume from that. So let's say you set this to 100. This would be really, really large. This would be like every day or two you get a new pickle file. If my job were to switch off at, say, like the 50th tick of this 100 snapshots, I would lose a lot of training time. So like you kind of want to set this to like a decent value, just because you want to make sure that you actually are getting back to essentially backup files to resume from. Last thing we should note here is that we're doing a resume from FFHQ 1024. You can pass in a different path to this to point to a different pickle file if you want to resume or transfer learn from something else. The truth is that for most 1024 by 1024 models, if you do a resume from FFHQ, like if it's a brand new training session you're running, this will be fine. What you might see we do, especially in something like Colab, where Colab restarts every 20 hours, is you pass in the last finished pickle file into your resume, and then you can pick up from there. So if you want to train for 3 or 4 days, you might just run that a couple times with the latest pickle file produced out of your snapshots every time. This looks good to set up. The other thing that's set here is mirror -1 equals true, so we could also say true. Another thing that we might want to do is there's metrics. So I'm actually going to leave metrics on. But if you want to turn metrics off to save yourself a little bit of time, metrics do take about 15 to 20 minutes per snapshot. So this, every time that the snap count runs, you'll get a fake file, you'll get a pickle file, and you'll also get a metric score. So metrics take about an additional 20 minutes to run. So if you set this to 1, and let's say it takes 30 minutes to do your training, it's going to be 30 minutes plus 20 minutes to run a metric score. So I don't really recommend setting metrics on and letting your snap be 1. You're just going to slow down your training. But for this example, like, because I give it a little bit of time, I'm going to let this run for a while, and I'm going to let the metrics sort of run. So I'm actually going to remove that and just use the default metrics. So at this point, I think we're ready to train. So we're going to go ahead and hit return. Now, I'm going to run this for a very short period of time. Actually, you know what? That's fine. I'll let this run for a short period of time. I'm going to leave my machine open and just sort of come back. What I actually recommend doing is maybe setting this to like 1 and letting it run for one whole snap session. And then if it works, then what we're going to do is we're going to come back and we're going to change our training to use the nohup command. The problem with this right now is that with Paperspace, when you disconnect from this interface, you are actually closing out this session, which means any process that's running right now will actually be stopped. So that means when you close out of this window, your training will stop running. So we're going to do in a minute, I'm just going to run this and then pause the video and then come back once it's finished. I'm going to show you how to use a different command at the very beginning of this command to actually save, sort of like train behind the scenes so that you don't get disconnected. So we'll come back in a couple minutes. I'm just going to run this and I'll come back and sort of show you what happens, and I'll show you how to use nohup. You'll see right now it's downloading our transfer learning. It's downloading FHQ 1024 by 1024. And if you're ever interested, you can go through this this JSON file and sort of see all the various things that are being set. Most of the stuff you can change in the training commands, but some of it you might also need to change directly in the code. I'll probably in another class video go through every one of these commands, but for now we'll just sort of like run the training and sort of see what's happening. So here it's building our network. We're building up the generator and we're building the discriminator below it, and we're starting to run our command. I've actually not seen this before on Paperspace. I might need to look into what this means, but it looks like it's working fine. It might just be a warning instead of an error. And we should just be about there. Yep, so if you get to this point of training for 2500K images, it means training is going the way it should. You might get some errors if there's some issues with your data set after this point, but at this point I'm feeling pretty good. What I would probably recommend for most folks is that you run this command by itself the first time. Make sure that your images are being generated, and then once it runs through one tick, then we'll restart and do no hub. So you might just want to follow along with me directly. So I'm going to let this train for about 30 minutes to an hour, and then I'll come back. Okay, so I'm back. It's about actually 3 hours later. Something I didn't really realize about Paperspace is I don't think mixed precision works on the P5000. I'm not sure why that is. It might have something to do with some software issues within Paperspace. So one thing to note is generating images is actually going to take a little bit longer to do on Paperspace, or generating training at all is going to take a bit longer to do on Paperspace than it might on something like Colab. So two notes here as we sort of like look at what happened when training. So first thing is you'll see that at each of these tick points, this is the new tick for each model. So when it starts at tick 0, and that usually only takes a couple minutes. We then evaluate our metrics. So the metric for that very first sort of first round of training, which is basically nothing. So it's comparing sort of the transfer learning to the Reals data set, has a very, very high number. That's to be expected, 260. Next, we run the next tick, which looks like it took about 50 minutes, just judging between these two time periods. That's really long. I would expect, I think on my local machine, when I run something of a P series, it takes about 30 minutes. So I'm not sure what's going on there. But anyway, then we run the next snapshot, or sorry, the next metric run, and we see it only dropped 10, I don't know, points or whatever you want to call that. That's to be expected because, again, it takes a little while for this transfer learning to really kick in. So one thing I would say is if you're running on Paperspace, maybe skip metrics entirely, because for every snapshot you're on it, you're losing another 55, 60 minutes just running metrics, which at 75 cents a minute or 75 cents an hour for training on a Paperspace machine is pretty expensive. So might skip that. So one thing to do is if you just want to stop your training, you can go ahead and do that by hitting Control-C. And let's see if that worked. Control-C. Yep, that stops. So that stops your training. So now your training is stopped. Now what I want to do is actually want to restart my training. I'm going to run it in no hub mode, which basically means it's going to run in the background, which means when I disconnect, it will not stop the training. So the way to do that is I'm going to press up once in here. That reloads all of this. I'm going to change my snap settings to 4. because again, I'm going to sort of walk away and not really check on this thing. So at 45 minutes, that means this is going to take, what, about every 3 hours I'll get a fake sample, which is fine. I'm also going to change my resume settings to point to the latest pickle file. The reason for that is I just spent 3 hours training. I don't really want to lose that time. Now, the truth is this won't really affect training that much, but it's helpful to just sort of have something here. So I'm going to go ahead and click on this pickle file. I'm going to hit copy, and then I'm going to come over here, and I'm going to hit, believe Command V will paste. Nope, that will not. This is where pasting won't work, so let's do this. Let's delete this. And I believe I just want to use the context command, which is going to be this. That works. Cool. So the last thing I want to do is I'm going to hit Control A. That's going to take me to the front of this line, and I want to do no hup. And all it's going to do is it's going to save out all of this log, everything you see above here, to a file called nohup.out, and then it's still going to run this command. So what that's going to do is in the background, it's going to just start running this. What I'll do is I'll check in again in about 4 hours, and we'll look and see what we've got going here. So I'm going to go ahead and hit return, just have this run. And you'll see here that says ignoring input and appending output to nohub.out. That means nothing will be outputting here. So if there is an error message, you won't see it here. Now, I didn't get an error message previously when I ran that first run, which means I shouldn't really expect any errors in the second run. But just in case, it's worth like checking in every once in a while. And I'll show you how to do that in just a minute. Excuse me, you do want to check to make sure that your run is still running, so you're not being charged for a Paperspace server that isn't even running anything. So while that runs in the background, let's go ahead and take a look at what our actual outputs were here. So if I look here, this is that first training session, and you'll see here I have a file called fake000, a file called fake00004, fakes init, reels, and then pickle files, and some other files that I could look at or maybe ignore, including metrics. So let's take a look at just sort of what these image files are. So if I double click on fakes000, this is what I started with, right? So this loads up FFHQ. It transfer learns off that. So obviously my very first initial run should just be faces. It should be FFHQ. Close that out. Let's take a look at the reels file. So the reels is going to load up a sample of all of my images that I fed into my data set. This is all the real images. Here are them. This is looking like exactly what I expect it to look like. And then if we start to look at sort of what we've got here for 004, now this won't look too drastically different because it's only, it's only one tick or 4,000K images since it started training. So you'll see some of the faces are starting to deteriorate a little bit. Maybe some of the facial structures are changing. This is all to be expected, but it's going to take a little bit of time. It's probably going to take, another handful of images before these actually get deleted entirely. So we'll see. I'm going to let this run for probably overnight maybe, and then I'll check in again in the morning and record that. So this is looking good. One other note that I should make a mention of here is the log.txt file, or sorry, the metric full txt. So this metric file, if we open this, contains how long it took to run each metric and then what the score was. So you'll see here it did take 55 minutes on average between each of these, which is really bad. Not fun. I think on my my V100 server on Colab, it took like 15 minutes. So there really must be something going on with mixed precision or some other effect going on here that's really affecting this. So I would definitely skip metrics on Paperspace if you can. You'll see here it started at 260 and then it dropped to 250. I would not expect it to get much higher for a little, or much lower for a little while, but it will pretty drastically drop over time. I would say between the next fake and maybe 5 or 6 fakes afterward, I would expect to see it drop. And I would maybe say it might drop to 50 or 60K. Some of this is hard to determine within how metrics work. I go into a lot longer of a detail on this in another video, which maybe I'll link to. So that's sort of it for now. I'm going to go ahead and close out of this session. And because I'm running in no hup mode, it's still going to run in the background. So I'm just going to go ahead and click, I'm going to go to my console. And you'll see I'm still running. It's important to not shut down your server. If you shut down your server, that's obviously going to stop. So I'll show you in the next 5 minutes of recording. I'll just show you sort of how to play with this stuff in NoHub to make sure it's still running and other things. So I'll be back in just a minute once I've got a little bit more time running. So I let this run overnight. Let's check in and see where we are. So I can come in here and I can sort of see what's going on. So one thing to note is I think I was sort of wrong in that at least with when you usually use SSH to log into machines, when you close that connection in your terminal window, it does disconnect the process. It looks like whatever Paperspace is doing here with the desktop app, you don't ever really disconnect. So you maybe don't have to use NoHub here. But for those of you who did use NoHub and want to sort of understand a little bit more of what's going on, you'll notice that there's really no output here. You can't really see what's going on. One of the ways to check this, make sure it's still running correctly, is first off, if there were an error here, it would actually stop running and it would go back to your command line interface. So that's how I know, number one, I'm still running here. Another way to check is to use a command called NVIDIA-SMI. And if we'll type that here, we'll do NVIDIA-SMI. We run this. You'll see here that there are some processes running. This is the important thing to look at. Anything called Xorg or Genome Shell are just sort of like basic Linux commands. You'll see they're not using that much GPU memory. There is, however, this command called Python, and that is using almost 16 gigabytes of GPU. Guess what that is? That is our StyleGAN model running. This also tells me that mixed precision is not working on these machines, which is something I'm going to have to look into in a minute. If this were using mixed precision, I would expect to see about 10 gigabytes. So I'll have to go back and figure out what's going on there. But I can see this model is running. So now if I wanted to kill this model, like basically if I was ready to stop, there's two ways I could do it. One is because this process is still running over here, I could do Control-C and actually stop it. The other way I can do it is directly from this interface. So if I do kill all -9, and then I take this PID, which is the process ID, and I type in 6338, and I hit return. Interesting, no process found. I think maybe I can do this without the -9. Let's see. Maybe I had the command wrong. Let me check here. Kill -9. Okay, I think that worked. So now if I go back and I look at the NVIDIA-SMI command again, see here there's no command, that process has been killed. So yeah, I just had I always forget the line here, but it's kill -9. And that just says kill this particular process, and then you go to process ID. And if I come back to my other terminal window here, you'll see this has been killed, right? It says killed. So this process is now stopped. So if you want to stop your command, that's how you do it. We can come over here and we can take a look at how our fakes are doing. So you'll see over time this built up. Let me switch to this view. You'll see that I have fake 000, so that was the very initial run. And it trained up all the way to fakes 00064. So what does that number represent? The number represents how many K images, or how many thousands of images, have been passed through the training model. So this means it is looked at, the discriminator has looked at 64,000 images from my data set. So my data set is, I believe, about 4,000. So it means it's looked at a lot of my images multiple times, but it's gone through the augmentation process to sort of augment it and keep it training. Now if I double click on this JPEG, you'll see here are my outputs. This is looking pretty great already, and I have to say StyleGAN2-ADA is really fast at converging. It produces really good images very quickly, right? So this ran overnight, and I honestly, I'll do an interpolation to check to see, but I think this model could be done already. If I ran it longer, I bet it would get even better textures, but it's already pretty great to begin with. So it means it's pretty fast, and again, even on a P5000, which is slow and not using mixed precision, it still ran pretty fast. So this is one of the huge benefits of StyleGAN2-ADA is with that augmentation process. It does converge on a good-looking model very quickly. So this looks pretty great. I'm glad I sort of stopped my run. If I wanted to continue it, I could. Basically, what I would do is I would take this pickle file, this one here, and I would use that as my resume function again. So if I were to run that over here, see how it says right now resume is 0004 pickle. I would just switch that to this path. So I could just come in here and just copy, and I could then paste it here. And that will then pick up and resume from this point. So that's a good way to just resume if you just want to stop it, test it, resume again. Now, if you are really happy with how your model turned out and you want to actually just sort of maybe save it or move it to working in Colab to do some image generation or interpolation, what I recommend you do is you actually just upload this to your Google Drive. There are ways, again, through like SSH or FTP to download these images directly from the server. But honestly, I find it just as easy to open up Google Drive or open up Dropbox and just drag these files in there and save them that way, and then sync them or move them down from your local computer onto your hard drive. It'll be faster to move these over, and it's just a little bit of a cleaner interface and not as difficult to have to like figure out what your IP address is and other things. So once you've done everything you want to do, I recommend there's sort of two things you can do. So the first is let's go back to the console. So if you're not going to train anymore, but you're not finished using the machine, like maybe there's another model you want to train, but you have to build your data set. Maybe you might come back to this and train it for a little bit longer once you've played with it a little bit more. The thing you'll want to do is click on this gear icon and then come over here and go to shutdown. So this will just shut down your machine. Basically what will happen is all of your work will be saved to that disk still. But your machine will not be operational, which means you won't be charged that hourly rate. So I think it's like 76 cents an hour. You won't be charged for that rate. And then you can open up and restart the machine whenever you want to. So I'm going to go ahead and hit shutdown. And this will start spinning until it says off. Now, if you're completely done, like let's say you've uploaded all the files you want to your hard drive or to Google Drive, and you just like, you don't want to pay any fees anymore for this machine. Because remember, you are being charged a disk fee. So like every month you're going to be charged like $10 or $7.50 or something for the storage space on this machine. If you are completely done and you never want to use this again, if you come down here and you click deactivate, that will destroy the machine. So like in terms of the virtual space and the virtual disk, Paperspace will no longer see this thing. Now it will also delete all of your files. So just be aware that you want to make sure that you've backed up and saved your work where you can. But if you're ready for that, go ahead and hit deactivate. I'm not going to go ahead and do it. I'm going to keep training on this machine for a little bit longer. So that's pretty much everything. That's start to finish training your own model inside of Paperspace. I know this is a long video. I really appreciate people hanging with me. If you have additional questions, please feel free to drop me a note on YouTube or join our Slack channel and ask there. Thanks again, and I'll see you next time.